Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Is there still more to Immanuel Quickley's game? And is his exit from New York inevitable? That next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, and today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because that would make you an everydayer and therefore one of my best friends. If you want to participate in that fun opportunity, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and hit that notifications bell to never miss an episode. And then be sure to do the same on your audio podcast platform of choice. I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. Today, I am joined by Prez, the co-host of Pod Strickland, the solo host of Draft Strickland, a fantastic podcast breaking down, you guessed it, draft prospects that are relevant to the New York Knicks. That comes back this week, and check that all out on the Strickland at the Strick.land on all forms of social media, and follow Prez at _Presidente on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, you will see it in the graphic. We have a whole bunch of fun stuff to get to in terms of player development trends for Immanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, and Quentin Grimes, and other big questions about that trio, so I won't delay us any longer. Let's get into it right now with Prez. Yeah, I mean, look, we said it going into this season. Like, I think he was last year. Like, there was no argument that he was the Knicks' third best player, unless you wanted to make a case for Mitchell Robinson. I would have heard that out. But and this season, I don't know if he's been that. Like, I think Mitch probably would have taken that mark this year, but he's fourth at worst, I would say, and just because of the glut they have at guards, like and the lack of size and the lack of Brunson's size, as good of a defender as he is, like it's never been appealing to Tibbs, and that's despite the fact that like all the numbers last season, like for him and Brunson together, scream that it was like one of the best two-man backcourt combos in the NBA, and that was in the regular season and in the playoffs, where Quickley shot like crap, and it didn't matter because the defense was so good when he was on the floor. Was that a little small sample size against the Cavs team that couldn't hit a shot? Sure, but they were awesome all year. I would still like to see it, and I've kind of been, and like we can just go quick on this because like this is a whole episode, but like I've kind of been in the same place on it. Like I almost don't see how they bring him back and keep doing this on one hand, because like he's clearly someone who deserves more time. And I guess just because of his height and because of the fact that like he hasn't established himself as like a consistent 20-point scorer in the NBA, there are only so many teams that are going to give him a substantially larger role than the Knicks. But whether that's like in Orlando or somewhere else, like he deserves the right to go and find that, because I just think there's so many different, I mean, this is exactly what you're getting at. There's so many different things he does well. And when you play him the amount of minutes you play him, like it kind of boils down to like, all right, just score the basketball. And like, and obviously like the defense is still there and it's good, but like it doesn't show what he can be as a secondary playmaker, and just different ways he can, like, I think even having that mid-range game and that turnaround game, that's more valuable, like the more possessions he takes, because his overall like mid-range efficiency, including floaters, is the same as last year. But I think if he was playing more minutes and taking more shots, you would see the difference in the fact that his bag is deeper, because defenders would start taking certain stuff away. And like you take that long mid-range away, it's like, all right, I'm going to get an extra step and I'll get to that floater, and it would look better. So I think we're both saying the same thing. I'm doing it a little bit more long-windedly than you. I guess the flip side of that is, because he's not having a great statistical season, like, I don't know if there's maybe the Pistons would if they strike out on some other stuff, because they just have room and they have desperate need for someone with Immanuel Quickley skill set. But I don't know if there's a team out there that's going to offer him $25 million, and maybe the Knicks just keep him by default. And I'm a Knicks fan first, so obviously I want him on this team. But if I was an Immanuel Quickley family member, like I would want him to be somewhere else, as much of a showman as he is, and as much as the Garden is kind of the perfect platform for him. Like I don't know if this is the best situation for him long term.
Yeah, if you're Quickley's family, you're like, go play with Wemby and just light it up in San Antonio or something like that. But to your point, like, restricted free agency is a tough nut for other teams to crack, because like say the Knicks are like, well, he's our fourth best player, so we don't want to pay him too much. We'll give him 23. The most we'll give him is 23, and then the Spurs are like, we'll offer a offer sheet of 4 years, 26 million a year or something like that.
Yeah.
That's not that much higher than 23. So the Knicks would probably just be like, oh, yeah, we're going to match that.
Yeah.
We'd rather just like, even if he's not as high in our priority list, like we're just going to match that. And then if you want him, you can trade for him or something like that. Or we'll trade him to we'll open the bidding and see what people say or whatever. So like you have to go way high to successfully get somebody out through restricted free agency, and that hardly happens for starters who are quote unquote proven, who play 30 plus minutes a game. Like if you're trying to look in past precedent for instances in which a team made a huge overpay for a player who's like a sixth, seventh man, even if they deserve more, there's really not that many equivalent situations. The closest I can think of was actually when the Knicks overpaid for Tim Hardaway to come back. But even that was like, people remember Tim Hardaway going to the G League in Atlanta and then figuring his stuff out. But he ended up starting 30 games that year, which is a not insignificant portion of the season. And, that was all towards the end of the season. So even that is a little bit of apples to oranges, as like he wasn't a starter most of the year, but he was a starter at the end of the year, which is when the things mattered a little bit more. I mean, they weren't the best team in the world or anything, but there's just not a lot of precedent for that. And, all it takes is one team, right? So like if I was the Spurs, hell freaking yeah, I'd be like 29 million a year for 4 years. We're not paying anybody else. Who cares about Keldon Johnson and whoever else they're paying, right? Like what's his face, Zach Collins, like whatever. If you got to make some moves, if it's really that tight pockets and you got to make some moves to get on someone like Quickley, a point guard who doesn't suck, unlike their current point guards, for your generational prospect, then I would do that. But that's easy for me to say here on this podcast. You don't have to go to your owner and say, hear me out. There's a guy who doesn't play 25 minutes a game and has never played as a starter. And his best accolade is he almost won Sixth Man of the Year. And we're going to offer him $130 million. What do you think, owner? Like, that's a tough sell, for a risk-averse ownership. It would take a team that is willing to really stick their neck out, and maybe it happens, but I would be surprised.
All right, let's jump to RJ Barrett. He was someone you did some work in FIBA breaking down his shot over the summer.
Like a maniac.
Yeah. I mean that's deep. That's sicko stuff, man. But it was warranted in the sense that it obviously looked great to start this year when he shot a 1,000,000% from three. That's not a joke. That was the actual number for the first 12 or so games of the year. And then he gets hurt, migraines, maybe something else. Maybe it was a knee, who knows? Comes back. And since then I don't have a number in front of me, but somewhere around like a 28, 29% 3-point shooters. It's rounded out to 35% on the season. He's shooting like a little bit worse at the rim this year than he did last season. Again, the frequency isn't super, super different for him, in terms of his at the rim attempts. The playmaking obviously shined in the playoffs in a way that like I don't think any of us totally expected to, and he just became much more of a proactive passer and driving to not get himself a shot, driving to get someone else's shot than we've seen in the past. That was there early in the season. That went away. The last 3, 4, 5 games, it feels like that's normalized a little bit. The finishing has been better. He's shown off this really like sick spin move through double teams that I love every time he gets to that. my big thing with him is every time he slows down around the rim, I think good things happen. But Prez, I'm getting ahead of myself. Do I just drive myself crazy with this guy as a shooter? Like, think he's going to be good, think he's going to be bad? Is he just sort of like a 35% guy on mostly open threes? And should we just accept that's who RJ Barrett is for the rest of his career? All right, guys, we're going to come back with Prez and talk RJ Barrett in just a second. What are reasonable expectations for him as a shooter going forward? And did we maybe overrate his run in the playoffs as a playmaker? But before I do that, I wanted to remind you that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Whether or not your family gives gifts during the holidays, you get to define how you give to yourself. And the holidays are a great time to do that. So whether it's by starting therapy, going easier on yourself during the tough moments, or treating yourself to a day of complete rest, remember to give yourself some love this holiday season. One way I do that for myself is through therapy. I think it's a fantastic way to self-evaluate objectively and maybe strip away some of the things you do. It just is like a habituated response to negative things that happened in your past, and kind of redefine who you ultimately want to be as a person. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, it's a good idea to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So in the season of giving, give yourself what you need with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
I mean, maybe. I am really mad that his shooting post my games has made my otherworldly prophetic predictions look very run of the mill now. So I'm gonna need him to get it together for the remaining 50 or so games that he's gonna play, because I got a reputation out here, and he was playing his part until he wasn't. But I think it'll probably end up going back up. He's been in a, not up to like 40s like it was before, but like he's just been in a major shooting rut. Like you said, some depends on where your cutoff is, but like I think, let's see, I just had it pulled up here. In 8 games in December, he's shooting 24% from 3, 10 for 41. So it's not good, but I hope that as he's continues to just go through the ups and downs of the seasons, it'll probably settle in closer to like 37, 38. That was my initial kind of guess after FIBA. He has taken a couple of ill-advised, like he's been like messing around with off the dribble threes. Not a lot, but like enough where I'm like, hey, stop that. You don't need to do all that. He's still great from the corner and less great from above the break. Another notable split in his shooting numbers is his on Synergy. They track, and there's noise in this, but they can divide shots up into guarded and unguarded. And I think on the season, his guarded 3-point percentage is like 20, but his unguarded is like 50 something. And I couldn't find the tweet, so maybe I just DM'd it to someone or something, or maybe I just imagined it all in my head. But like that was another thing with his kind of mechanics. It's kind of hard to describe through audio only, but like the way he kind of loads it up, it's like a very particular way. And if he's open, he can get to where he needs to get his arms to do that. But if he's contested, it's a little bit more difficult. And on like the super duper nerd draft portion of Twitter, there's a term called like self-organization. And what it kind of refers to is like things like if you have to get into your shooting mechanics from a bad pass, or say you normally bring the ball from the left side of your body up to your shot like Kevin Durant does. What happens if someone overplays that left part of your like hip? Can you bring it up on the right side and still find your shooting mechanics and stuff like that? And RJ's always been kind of bad at anything where it's like adapting to shifting environmental circumstances. And you see that not just on his jump shots, but like on his floaters too, right? Like sometimes it's like, hey man, I don't know why you needed to take this sweeping floater versus Anthony Davis, because it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to adjust to shooting over that guy. And that's what he tried versus the Lakers, and it didn't go in. But he had a bunch of other floaters that did go in, right? So like, that's all a long way of saying, I think as long as the Knicks keep getting him good shots and he keeps taking them, the jumpers will stay in the like mid to high 30s. But yeah, I think we can pack up that the dreams of 45%.
It was a golden run.
We'll always have the free throws.
Yeah, we'll have the free throws. This is a broader question on him, and I maybe a challenging one to answer succinctly. But while I have you, I wanted to get to it. How normal is kind of the developmental pathway he's on? Because I think I found myself, and I don't think I'm alone in this, like being like disproportionately frustrated with RJ, maybe compared to like almost any of the other young guys. And part of that is, I guess, just kind of the inherent expectations that come with being the third pick in the draft. But it feels like for years, and this is certainly amplified by doing a daily podcast versus doing like with RJ, you'd be better off doing these every 3 months probably, but doing a daily podcast, you live it so often. And there's so many nights where like I'm kind of just watching and like in my most honest moment, like you give me truth serum, I'm like, all right, I don't think this guy has it. Like, I think he's a perfectly fine NBA player, but I think because of where he was drafted and maybe more than anything else for Tom Thibodeau, just his height and his build, he is given a disproportionately large role in this team versus someone like an Immanuel Quickley, and to a lesser degree, like a Dante DiVincenzo, a Josh Hart, a Quentin Grimes. And then there are other nights where like the decision making just seems better. And like a small example of that is the last few games. Like I think he's been super conscientious about getting Quentin Grimes open threes and like driving and like distorting a defense just to get Grimes open. And we've heard the Knicks like pay lip service at different times this season, like getting Grimes in more of a rhythm. And like obviously what happened with him speaking out. And then RJ's like at like a relatively young age is like internalizing that and be like, all right, like I'm going to try to do that for my teammate. And I assume you're on the same page with this, but that's the version of RJ that I love the most. And like being very selective with the shots and knowing like when to go, when not to go, and using the fact that like his greatest skill is his downhill gravity to create for others. Like I just want him to lean into that tenfold. And it just feels like at times he does. And then there are nights where he just sort of forgets about it.
Yeah. Him forgetting about it is definitely the default setting here. He is among the worst players in the NBA in terms of how frequently he passes out of his drives. And like, if you go even back to Duke, he's always been a much better outside in passer, as in like, if he gets a pick and roll and the roll man, opens up the shooter on the weak side, he can do those like LeBron Luka passes from the outside. But once he gets within like 15 feet of the hoop, this guy doesn't see anything. And that's the thing that, to me, I agree with you. Like, it's the most frustrating part of his game. The missed jumpers and stuff like that I can take, but like the decision making in the paint is just horrid. And he hasn't, in my opinion, really shown growth in that respect. And, this is kind of what I cautioned people about after the playoffs last year, because versus Miami, he didn't really make a lot. It was mostly versus the Cavs where he was just getting all these assists. But what I was worried about was versus the Cavs, he was able to do that because the Cavs game plan was, we're going to put all these people in the paint and abandon players above the arc. That was their job. They're like, we're going to cover the paint. We're going to cover the corners. Knicks, good luck shooting. These guys stink at shooting. So it wasn't reading and reacting for RJ. It was just, if I drive, I'm going to kick, because like I don't have to see whether they're covering me or not. I know they'll be open. But when you're playing a different team every day or every game, you don't know if they're going to do that. And it's really frustrating to see him like never reset a play. Like, you could just keep dribbling and dribble the ball out, or just kick it out to a teammate to reset it. Like, you don't need to get your pistol action and then get your screen and get the defender on your hip, and then with 10 seconds left, take a floater versus Anthony Davis. That's an insane shot. Like, you're not going to make that. You have good teammates who are really good. Even if they're not open, they can probably create something. So, like, trust your teammates. And it's just, it's frustrating because you expect players to grow their skills in the years, and in years 2, 3, 4, 5, and we really haven't seen that with RJ. He's grown his physical strength a ton, and he's gotten better at free throw shooting, but skill wise, he's not really a better passer. He's a little bit of a better shooter, definitely from free throw. And now, like we were talking about before, he's probably settling in. He's going to settle in at like league average ish percentage on an easy diet, right? There's plenty of wings who, if you gave them the RJ Barrett 3-point diet, they'd probably shoot a higher percentage. So, like, and these things are all related. Like, if he passed more, his efficiency would be higher, and his teammates would, like, there's a world where he's on a second team after the Knicks trade him for someone, right? Maybe it's a superstar or something. And that's where a coach tells him, hey, like, you're collapsing the defense. We need you to average 5 assists per game from driving and kicking. And it's not because you stink at shooting or because any slight to your game, but we know collapsing the defense is a strength of yours, and we want you to capitalize on that. But for whatever reason, whether it's him not internalizing it, or him, or nobody telling him, or people telling him and it doesn't get through to him, I don't know why, but like, he doesn't understand that. And it's just, given his usage as being pretty high, like, it's unique to your point that you started with, is like, it's unique. There are very few players in the NBA who have a high usage and probably don't deserve it in terms of offensive ability. Andrew Wiggins used to be the poster child for that. Yeah. RJ's the guy. Jalen Green is another guy like that. Cade Cunningham is another guy like that. Those are the 3 guys. That's it. There's nobody else in the NBA, in my opinion.
Disproportionately Canadian is our takeaway there.
Yeah, and then Cade Cunningham, I guess.
All right, guys, when we come back on Locked On Knicks, I wanted to tell you about Quentin Grimes' continued development and what the Knicks can continue to do to facilitate it. But before we get into that, I wanted to tell you about our good friends over at PrizePicks. So you might be at home asking, well, what is PrizePicks? I'll tell you what PrizePicks is. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports DFS platform in North America. We're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS is just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, many of whom are pros and sharks and weirdos who live in their mom's basement, are really good at math. I'm just calling them weirdos because I'm jealous. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll. And so you're just competing against the stats. You're not competing against people who are better at math than you. Trust me, I've done it. It's not a good idea. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a plus 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. Or if you're like me, you're going to go with Jalen Brunson and maybe a Darren Waller in there. He could have a big week. And PrizePicks also offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. The most frustrating thing I've ever gone through, whether it's regular fantasy sports or daily fantasy, is someone that where I made the right call and he just turned an ankle at a wrong time. Well, for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use our code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, that is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. I just don't know where it goes for RJ, especially because like it would be one thing if you just heard like, yeah, he's coasted on his laurels a whole night, like his whole life, like basketball family, Steve Nash, Godfather, number one player in his class for years and years and years, basketball royalty, Montford, Duke. But he's not that from all we know. He's like an extraordinarily hard worker, super driven, has had like the mentality of a pro from day one. And in some ways that almost makes it more concerning, right? That he hasn't figured this stuff out. And I think sometimes I get a little pessimistic with it. And maybe the answer there is to just accept him for what it is and like hope, like even if it's by like percentages, he leans more and more into playing a certain way. And I wonder if to your point, it might ultimately take another team like it did for Andrew Wiggins. And we saw at least temporarily at the time. Right now, it's very temporary. Like he figured it all out, put it all together. And RJ obviously doesn't have quite that ceiling athletically, but I do think there's a world where and Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo were talking about this today on a team with more spacing and less guys that almost exactly like replicate his skill set, but better in Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. Like he can lean into his strengths a little bit more. Let's finish on Quentin Grimes. I had some stuff on Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, but we can save it for another day because I think Grimes is the next most interesting guy in my opinion. Just in the sense that like I don't know what I expected out of RJ this year. Like I was hoping it would be better, but I was like kind of like almost maybe cautious pessimism would be the right way to describe it. Jalen Brunson, I was like anything more you get is gravy. Immanuel Quickley, like this, it doesn't totally shock me. Once they brought in DiVincenzo, like I think all of us kind of had a feeling like this might be a little bit of a rocky year from him, where he had a career season, was so good, and then he's not going to get a chance to build on it. Grimes is in that context, like probably the most disappointing out of everyone, because it felt like just as a starter, there was a clear-cut lane for him to do more. And maybe I underestimated, like, all right, just like continually cutting into his minutes, and the fact that like no one in this starting lineup is really in line to sacrifice shots. Like, where was the growth going to come from? And just how much of the post All-Star break he had last year was like close to 15 a game, shooting 45% from three on great volume. Like how much of that was who he's going to be? How much of that was a mirage? And ultimately maybe it's very similar to Quickley, where it's just lack of opportunity. But have you seen anywhere this year where you feel like, all right, he's clearly gotten better at that? Or is he at least in the way the Knicks use him, like basically the same guy he was last season and maybe at least on a small sample doing a little bit worse at those things?
Yeah, I think his role is mostly the same. The Knicks offense just got off to such a rough start though this year that like the rhythm was off for everyone, right? Jalen and Julius nobody knows what the hell was happening with them early on. And Quentin Grimes' usage is so minuscule that like he's not creating. He has to thrive off of advantages created by others. And he wasn't getting those consistent spoon-fed shots with the same regularity. And I think it messed him up. I think it messed up his rhythm. And on top of that, for all his awesomeness last year, Quentin Grimes is more of a pretty good shooter, not a great one. If you look at a lot of metrics, like he's, the offense in the league is crazy right now. There's a lot of good shooters. And like, I think Knicks fans are kind of learning that this year, right? Like everybody was like, Quentin Grimes, like his potential as a shooter is crazy. He could be one of the best shooters in the league. And maybe, but like Dante DiVincenzo is just like a random guy, basically. Like he's just a solid bench player who can sometimes start depending on the team. And he's like very clearly a better shooter than Quentin Grimes. Like he can, Quentin Grimes' advantage is he has that high release and he can do like a little bit of funky off the dribble stuff, although he hasn't done it much. But Dante DiVincenzo is pulling up from like 30 feet, not even always facing the hoop in like very difficult situations. So like there's a lot of good shooters in the NBA. It's not even a slight on Grimes. It's just there's a lot of good shooters in the NBA. So it's I think he got in his own head a little bit, and the opportunities were a little rarer, and the bench move for him, I don't think it's an accident that he looked a little more comfortable there, because that unit is going to deliver you some more opportunities via kickouts and screens and stuff like that than the starters are. It's way more dynamic, even if it's overall less effective, and that's good for a shooter. So This is a good way to get him back on track. Does he get his starting spot back? I don't know. I think the main weird thing that concerned me, like, I mean, I wouldn't say it concerned me more, but like my two biggest things were, number one, like his inability to hit a three above the break this season. That to me is like where you're seeing the biggest difference between him and DiVincenzo. But the second thing is his defense went from great to just good. And, you know, I remember the first game I kind of noticed it was versus the Pelicans. And CJ McCollum drove on him and bodied him. And I was like, what's going on here? Like, CJ's a really good scorer, but like, this isn't a power forward. This is like someone who's shorter than you. And maybe CJ's morphing into one of those dudes with like old man strength now or something. But like, I'm like, I thought quite guys was strong enough to handle this. And then that kind of showed up a lot over the course of the season early on was guys know now that like if Grimes is on you, the answer isn't to try to like play with the ball and do a bunch of crossovers and stuff like that. It's to just body him. And he's pretty fast and strong in his own right, but like if you're Jaylen Brown, right, like you're gigantic. Quentin Grimes is strong. Jaylen Brown's is really strong. And there's a lot of other wings who Quentin Grimes is tasked with guarding because, you know, when he was in the starters night in, night out, he had the hardest matchups in the league, right? So like that didn't change from last year. And teams were just kind of punishing him for it by just getting into him physically. And then there's also small sample size noise. Like I was looking at some of his stats on like pick and roll defense and isolation defense and synergy, and they're all through the roof, like way more than they should be, even with everything that I've just said about like his defense falling off a tick. Like he's not like a bum on defense, but guys were just like cashing all types of crazy shots through just kind of like small sample size noise. So it was kind of a perfect storm of a lot of things. And so I understand why he's frustrated, but I'm optimistic that him getting to play with Quick and Hartenstein and whatever, it's gonna help him get back on track.
Yeah, obviously those first two games, he just looked awesome, and to me, like the I was almost more weirded out by the total lack of him getting to the rim, and maybe I shouldn't have been just because the opportunities weren't really there. But last year, he was obviously super efficient, like shot over 70% at the basket, which even on low volume was amazing, and like I just enjoyed but just eye test wise, like what I saw from him as a finisher, where like he like has great core strength, I think, which obviously helps him defensively, and ability to like take contact and hang and hit. And just because that's a quality that obviously Julius has, and like RJ sometimes, but I don't even think RJ is the touch that Grimes. In fact, I know RJ doesn't really have the touch that Grimes does, like right at the basket. And I was hoping that would be unlocked more this year, and that like if you get into a playoff series against the Miami and they throw like not that Duncan Robinson's the worst defender in the league, but someone like a Duncan Robinson on him, like that, like Grimes, like you could, like when nothing else is working, like you could throw him the ball at the end of the shot clock and he can, like, he's not gonna like cook someone, but like a rip through, like one dribble, like get a step, get to the basket and finish. And that I think like with some time to reflect on it over the summer, I was kind of the opinion of like, all right, that's like a really tough thing to ask of a guy to do after he never does in the regular season. I was wondering if they would get to that a little bit this year, even if it's, I don't know, 1-2 possessions per game. And there's just there's no room for it in the starting lineup, especially when, to your point, there was so much to figure out. And I'm hoping on the bench, there's a little bit of that. Like, I think he's had more like rim shots, like the last like 5 games than he did maybe the previous 20 before that. Not an official number, just kind of what I've noticed. But I'm kind of hoping that's there for him. And I'm curious if there's like another team where that would show up a little bit, or maybe he's just not that guy. He's just kind of a pure shooter.
I think most teams have a little bit more movement and dynamicness in the starting lineup than the Knicks. They're just an isolation heavy team. Jalen Brunson, I'll put it this way, the best movement shooters in the NBA who are not Steph, it's like Buddy Hield, I think, statistically, year in, year out. And a Buddy Hield movement 3 is like the same or less efficiency than like Randall and Brunson isolations. So like the Knicks know they got a good fastball and they just going to stick with it. Of course, when you have teams that don't have that, like it's not just the points per possession on like a movement three, but it's like the havoc that causes, right? And that trickles down into like, we got to worry where Buddy Hield is. And now that frees up someone else cutting on the other side of the court or whatever. That doesn't get quantified as much. But I do think if he did get a chance to play on another team, if we moved him, I wouldn't be surprised if he looked a little bit more comfortable. But the flip side of that is like I said before, there's a lot of good shooters in the NBA, right? So like he separates himself from a lot of role player shooters by playing great defense. That is without question his special sauce. And like I'm just gonna pick them randomly. Like say he got traded to Toronto and we got someone like OG, or it was a 3-team deal and someone else got OG or something like that. And the Knicks were just trying to lighten up the rotation squeeze a little bit. Like, I don't know. Is he a better shooter than Gary Trent Jr.? Probably not. Is he better than Gary Trent Jr.? He's definitely a way better defender. But like Gary Trent Jr. can shoot off the dribble and stuff. So like, I don't know. Is he a better young shooting prospect than Grady Dick? Right now, Grady Dick is in the G League, so probably. But if you're Toronto, is it like a super slam dunk that you want to like pay Quentin Grimes in the future when you just drafted Grady Dick? I don't know. And it just kind of shows you how difficult it is, right? Like, there's so many teams that got just a bunch of shooters, and that being said, like most of those shooters can't defend like Grimes does, even on his bad days. So like I do think he'll find his footing, whether it's on the Knicks or not. It remains to be seen. But yeah, it's just like you said at the top, it was a little bit of a reality check, I think, for everyone.
I think it's hard when you cover one team, and even if you watch the rest of the league, you get a little precious about your own guys. I'm guilty of it, and like you can overrate them a little bit, and I'll still argue that a lot of these guys are underrated by the rest of the league, and in different contexts they do better. But Prez, that's why I always like having you on, because you're able. I think you're very, very objective about both good and bad. I told you this would be a half hour. We're now over an hour, so I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your night, because you work a very cool full-time job. But I really, really appreciate the time, man. I love talking to you. And just before I let you go, can you tell everyone one final time where they can find all your great work?
You can find me at _Presidente with a Z on Twitter. And you can find my voice on Pod Strickland and on Draft Strickland, which comes back this week. So Stay tuned for that. Yeah, it's sicko time officially. Ready to dive into some possible second rounders, sleepers, foreign prospects. You got it. It's all coming.
I genuinely cannot comprehend how you have the time, but you figure it out. And produce incredible work. For Prez, I'm Gavin. We will talk to you very, very soon on Locked On Knicks.